PTSD is on the rise, particularly for the global majority. But mindfulness and hope can make a difference for Black adults experiencing PTSD. My name is Ted Meissner. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. And today we're going to be exploring research around how hope and mindfulness can help people experiencing PTSD in the Black community. Our guest today is Elijah Murphy. Welcome to the podcast, Elijah. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, and I am really interested in hearing a little bit more about this research study that you've been part of. But before we go into that, can you say just a little bit about your background and the work that you've been doing, the research you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Currently I am pursuing my PhD in clinical psychology. I'm finishing up my fourth year now. Time flies, but also very slowly at the same time. Um, Researching various positive resilience traits and how they can be applicable among Black adults as well as other people of color. So I've done studies regarding Black, Hispanic, Asian individuals, and kind of seeing the differential relevance regarding things like hope, mindfulness, sometimes gratitude, and seeing whether they're helpful in the context of emotional disorders or trauma. Um, I like it because these are things that not only you do them in the research side of things, but very applicable to day-to-day life. So mindfulness, especially, we do those things, whether it be meditation, there's various apps now. And I think that thankfully, mindfulness is something that's really caught a lot of steam regarding day-to-day kind of self-help guides. So I think that type of stuff is really important. And yeah, also I want to see how these things also can provide a little bit of protection and resilience in the aspects of racism. So that's also another focus and an intention of mine, is to find different ways to protect against and heal from things like racism and racial trauma.
Yeah. And there's a lot to that, the unpacking of how DEI work is influencing PTSD and how it's influencing white privilege and societal norms, all the rest of that. Mindfulness and the other things that you mentioned, hope, gratitude, can make a positive change on that. So I'm kind of curious about what got you interested in doing a study that involved hope, mindfulness, PTSD in Black adults.
Yeah, absolutely. So my advisor, actually, he is a very big hope guy. He actually was the student of the kind of creator of hope theory. So hope theory was posited by Rick Snyder, who came up with this idea in when he was at the University of Kansas. Basically, hope is, so I think what a lot of people think is that hope is blind optimism, where I'm just hopeful for positive outcomes. But that's not really what the case is regarding our psychological definition of hope, at least by the way that Snyder kind of defined it. So hope is active goal setting and finding ways to find pathways to that goal. So I'm going to, it focuses on two main parts. One part being I'm going to have agency in order to go towards that goal that I've set. And then also my ability to find numerous avenues to get to that goal. And it's associated with a lot of positive outcomes, whether it be lower levels of things like anxiety, depression, or PTSD, but then positive outcomes as well regarding well-being. So being able to have more happiness in your life and those type of things. Um, and I wanted to see regarding hope and mindfulness, um, which one would be more or less effective regarding PTSD among Black adults? And in this sample of Black adults, it actually was Black adults who already endorsed that they experienced trauma. So that was kind of one of the focuses of the paper, was this is a sample of Black adults who are trauma exposed. Um, there was a checklist of about 17 different trauma types, and they had to indicate whether, it happened to them or maybe they've heard about it. Somebody they know has experienced that. Um, some examples being like natural disasters, sexual trauma, of course. But yeah, there were 17 different trauma types there.
Yeah. And I love the way you described hope as something very practical that has understanding. There are particular aspects to it to delineate it from the this pie in the sky kind of thing that doesn't have its feet on the ground and has practical applications, especially when avenues to manifesting that are blocked just
Mhm.
by the way societal systemic stuff is built in and built against different communities that are disenfranchised on a regular basis. So you also in the study you mentioned three domains of well-being: subjective, social, and psychological. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that too.
Absolutely. And sorry if you can hear my dog digging for toys right now. Um,
Always welcome on this podcast is dogs digging for toys.
um, but essentially, so yes, there are three main domains, well-being, which was kind of posited by Keys. So essentially what they kind of said was, okay, there's this mental health continuum. And with these three main domains of well-being, subjective well-being being, do I have more positive emotional experiences than negative emotional experiences? And then also, am I satisfied with my life currently? Psychological well-being actually has a lot of different parts to it. So some of those being, do I feel like I have mastery in my life? Do I feel like I have autonomy? How do I feel about my environment? There's six like little subdomains of psychological well-being. Social well-being kind of stems off of psychological well-being, but it enters the social sphere. So do I feel like I have meaning to my society? Do I feel like I have meaningful connections with other people? And those type of things. So trying to figure out three main ways that an individual can have flourishing versus languishing in their lives was kind of the idea behind this mental health continuum and having three main domains of well-being that people look at.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought up agency before and mentioned it here again with the psychological aspect that that ability to have choice, to be able to determine your own course is such an important aspect of that. So thanks for bringing that up in there as well. And tell us about the research. What did you do and what did you find?
So I'm not going to bore you with the details. So there's like a lot of complicated stats that was done, but folks aren't interested in that, right? So essentially, we looked at, again, hope and mindfulness separately and how they impacted PTSD and well-being in a sample of Black adults who indicated that they've experienced trauma before. And about what we expected, so hope and mindfulness being positive resilience traits, you would expect that they would predict lower levels of PTSD and higher levels of well-being. And that's about what we expected. But when we also did is, again, with our fancy stats, is we looked at them in the same model to see, okay, if we're accounting for mindfulness, does hope still have this effect? And vice versa. If we're accounting for hope, does mindfulness still have this effect? And our results were about that they did have the same effect regarding from the individual to the combined models. What we did have been noticing, though, regarding hope was that hope seemed to have a more robust effect on positive mental health outcomes than the negative mental health outcomes. And that's been consistent across another study I've done as well regarding looking at hope and people of color. So there's something that we're noticing, at least in our lab, that regarding individuals of marginalized ethnic identities, hope is having, again, they're still having associations with the negative mental health outcomes, so like PTSD or anxiety or depression, but those effects are a little bit smaller than the well-being outcomes, for example. We're still kind of trying to figure out why that is. But overall, as we predicted, hope and mindfulness both had adaptive impacts and adaptive associations with PTSD and well-being, as they was negatively correlated, which basically means that if you have higher levels of hope or mindfulness, your levels of PTSD are likely to be lower. And then positively correlated, which essentially means if I have higher levels of hope and mindfulness, I have higher levels of well-being as well. So that was kind of what we found. So I want to continue to do this research regarding various positive resilience traits in the context of various emotional disorders, but also trauma among Black adults and other ethnic minorities.
So with the results of this study, what are some of the implications, again, one of the things I appreciate about the conversation with you is this practicality of it. What are some ways in which this might manifest in the world? And what are some of the changes that it could really be helpful with?
Absolutely. So again, I always preface this by saying this is a cross-sectional study. So I cannot say hope causes this, mindfulness causes this, right? We cannot draw those conclusions from a study such as this. But it does provide us with a little bit more evidence that this is something that can be helpful in certain contexts. So if I'm able to practice more mindfulness and I'm living with PTSD, perhaps that can help me with some symptom reduction. Again, I will say that that needs to be empirically studied specifically regarding maybe I'm doing a treatment study, for example. And I believe there are treatment studies out there that does test mindfulness regarding PTSD and sometimes racial trauma too. Um, but it's giving us evidence that this is something that can be helpful and can be adaptive in these different contexts. The implications that I would like to see, and again, research is a slow moving process, but the reason why I want to test these kind of approaches is because they are strength based. There are things that are malleable and changeable. So with hope, those are things that I can work on. I can work on increasing my hope by working on things like goal setting, working on things on having agency and thinking about different pathways to my goal. With mindfulness, I can practice mindfulness. It's not just meditation, as you already know, um, but those are things that I can practice and cultivate, right? So these are strength-based approaches and seeing, okay, can I apply these in treatment settings is what I hope to accomplish regarding implications. So can hope be a, what we call a mechanism of change when it comes to clinical psychological treatments. So when we say mechanism of change, it's like, okay, if I'm trying to treat somebody's PTSD, for example, I'm going to target their levels of hope to see if that reduces their symptoms. And there is studies actually that regarding hope, that hope is a mechanism of change regarding anxiety. I believe there's studies that are already kind of working towards that. But for me, psychological research, which to know, I would hope to no surprise by anyone, but psychology has kind of neglected people of color for a long time. So with my work, I am looking to see how these factors are impacting people of color, and then seeing, okay, can I put these in culturally informed context and see whether they have adaptive impacts, actually empirically testing them instead of kind of just, I think the field of psychology has done this where we'll do studies in what we call weird samples, which that's a whole acronym of Western, individualized or industrialized, rich, democratic, etc. Samples of white college kids, right? And again, it's a convenience sample, don't have to pay for it, etc. But it does limit our ability to generalize it to not just the country, but the world, because that's not the demographic of what the world, it's not representative of what the world is. So with I'm trying to diversify psychology while also um, actually empirically testing these constructs within different communities that are ethnically diverse, et cetera, so that we can actually empirically test them and say, okay, we have found that this has been adaptive or not as helpful in individuals of this identity, and not just kind of saying, okay, I did this research in a sample that had nothing to do with the people that I'm actually trying to do this work with, and I'm just going to apply it here because we believe that the human experience is all the same, which evidence says that it's not. Um, so as I'm trying to continue to develop and contribute to the development of treatments for Black adults who are suffering from or living with PTSD, anxiety, depression, racial trauma, this is kind of what the implications of this research, and that's my goal and my aim. I know that was a little bit of a long-winded answer, but this is, it's all, for me, the practicality is what's important regarding research. So
Yeah, and that was spot on because it brings up it's so many layers to it. First is that the experience that is held by people of one particular segment of society does not match everyone else. Even individual mileage may vary in this kind of things.
yes,
We're
yes,
not
absolutely.
monolithic groups. cultural norms are tremendous variables with this. And as psychology has some growing to do and some gaps to fill with the focus that it's had primarily on white affluent, that particular cohort, and then blasting that across, oh, but this applies to everybody. And it's like, not necessarily so. There are differences here. Mindfulness has that same challenge. That is
Yes.
something within mindfulness communities is it has a focus that is something people are taking steps to shift. That's a lot of steps we got to take and a lot of movement to do. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think I would, one thing I would ask is with the higher proportion of PTSD in the global majority and people of color, what would be some things that you might say to encourage those, particularly Black adults, the focus for this particular study? What were some things you might say to encourage Black adults who may be experiencing PTSD?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I want to first off say there are a lot of Black and brown folks living with PTSD and complex trauma that have no idea, whether it be because they're getting misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, lack of access to mental health care, or the criteria by which we have for PTSD, they may not fit the criteria due to things like criterion A and stuff like that, which is a whole nother rabbit hole I'm not going to go down right now. But I would encourage to say that we are resilient, and that I know a lot of people preach resilience, and yes, this is my cat, and she likes to make appearances a lot when I'm at my computer. Um, a lot of people preach resilience as the answer, and that is not what I'm here to do. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to say resilience can be helpful, and with a lot of Black and brown folks, we've had no choice. Um, but it's not enough. There needs to be systems level changes for these things to start changing. That is another, when you were talking about some of the limitations of mindfulness and, positive psychology has, a clinical psychology has, but we put so much emphasis on the individual and say, okay, for example, hope. The individual, you're going to focus on goal setting and you're going to focus on having agency, saying, okay, it's up to me to figure out this goal and then figure out different pathways to this goal. But when I'm dealing with systems level oppression that is preventing me from or added barriers to me reaching this goal, what do I do then? Just say, okay, increase your levels of hope or practice mindfulness. And again, not to say that practicing mindfulness in these contexts may not be helpful, but it's not enough. And it can be invalidating as well to just say, hey, oh, you're going through all this. Hey, just do a little bit of meditation. So you asked regarding encouragement. My encouragement here is that I see you. And I'm with you on that. I'm not gonna self-disclose too much, but we in the same boat. Um, I acknowledge and I want to be a part of that change regarding psychology and being able to recognize, understand, and discuss. Okay, yes, you can improve an individual's level of resilience, but we gotta still take note of the systems and actively try to change the systems if things are actually going to change regarding different rates of PTSD, having more chronic courses of PTSD over the course of the lifespan. These things are not just individual factors just because someone is Black or brown. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that make these erroneous kind of conclusions, but it's not the case. There's systems level impacts that have them, institutional level factors that play a role, things like racism, things like oppression. Um, the rabbit hole goes deeper, and that's something I've been saying all of 2025. So again, that's my encouragement is that I see you, um, and to resist. I think that something that I've been reflecting on and learning about a lot more lately is that yes, resilience can be helpful, but again, that's not the end all be all. Again, we recognize these systems, and that's the first step is to actually recognize the systems. but then we got to do what we can to resist them. Um, and resisting them, having joy is a part of resisting them. So looking for things like psychological well-being, subjective well-being, having more positive emotional experiences than negative one, finding things like community when we're supposed to, or we're quote unquote supposed to feel left out or be individualized. Making sure that we have that community to boost our social well-being and have that social support and emotional support from our peers. Those are things that I would say to encourage us. And those are things that folks may not want us to hear, but that's most needed, especially today.
Yeah, and the importance of this focus, as you're saying, Elijah, it's not about just building your capacity to take things that are wrong and need to change. It's about, this is part of mindfulness, and it sounds like hope as well, is the noticing and actually acknowledging the conditions are screwed up. The conditions are causing these problems to exist. It's not about just having a thicker skin and being more resilient. It's about noticing what needs to change and having the agency to be able to make changes. And it doesn't have to be all at once. It
Mhm.
could be one step at a time, but actually taking those steps. That's the practical part of it. So thank you for all of that and the work that you're doing. And for those who are watching or listening to this on whatever platform you are on, there are links in the description of this to the paper that we've been talking about, as well as to Elijah's site. Elijah Murphy, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you come back soon. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here today, and thanks to our guest for lending his insights, his care, and his passion for this work. Remember, please do like and subscribe if this content is supportive for you in some way. That helps others to find it as well. And remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I hope to see you again soon on Mindfulness Voyage.